You're listening to a podcast by the Perennial Leader Project. To learn more, visit perennial.substack.com. Welcome back to another episode of In Search of Wisdom. Today we're discussing how to make space for paradox in daily life. By paradox, I mean the ability to hold opposing truths or practices in our minds. You can expect to learn what it means to be more open to life, how Carl Jung defined psychological and spiritual development, what Joseph Campbell meant by saying yes to life, and much more. To get us started, I'm going to define our terms as we do on most episodes. Then I'll read a short meditation titled Make Space for Paradox from the Letters to a Young Seeker series. And then to conclude the episode, we'll discuss how to put these ideas into practice in daily life. All right, without any further delay, I hope you enjoy this episode on how to make space for paradox. Before we begin, let's talk briefly about the meaning of paradox. Paradoxes have energized and mystified philosophers, scientists, and psychologists for millennia. The most common image of a paradox is probably the yin-yang symbol, which originated in Chinese philosophy. Around the 5th century BCE, known as the Axial Age by the philosopher Carl Jaspers, thinkers like Lao Tzu from the East and Heraclitus from the West grappled with ideas of paradox. In their book, Both and Thinking, authors Wendy Smith and Marianne Lewis explain that we are not alone in seeing interwoven opposites everywhere. Philosophers and others have grappled with these issues from early history to modern times. Examples of paradoxes are knowing and unknowing, power and vulnerability, good and evil, stability and change, love and hate, work and life, discipline and pleasure. Life is full of paradoxes. In a letter titled Make Space for Paradox, I wrote, "Dear fellow traveler, you may have noticed that many topics we discuss contradict one another. For example, one week we might explore the practice of solitude, and the next week the art of friendship. Learning to live is recognizing and holding the wisdom of apparent opposites." In his book, Lessons from an American Stoic, Mark Matusik, a previous podcast guest, calls it making space for paradox. Quote, "Reflect on the doubleness of experience and how apparent opposites can be equally true at the same time. Remember that there are two sides to what happens, at least, and that wisdom results in the ability to hold opposing truths in your mind at the same time, without either canceling the other out." End quote. When we reach conclusions in daily life, we are wise to attempt to reflect on how the opposite might also be true, or have potential upsides. You could use Montaigne's maxim of "what do I know?" multiple times throughout the day to help loosen and test your initial assumptions. Consider reflecting on a recent challenge. Can you observe the situation from multiple sides? Although this is more challenging than it sounds, it's important to remember that we can improve with intention and deliberate practice. The Trappist monk Thomas Merton observed, quote, "My soul does not find itself unless it acts. Therefore, it must act. Stagnation and inactivity bring spiritual death. But my soul must not project itself entirely into the outward effect of its activity. I do not need to see myself. I merely need to be myself. I must think and act like a living being." End quote. The key word in the last sentence is and, to think and act. Merton calls for balance, order, rhythm, and harmony. If we strive to be happy by fulfilling all the silences of life with sound, productive by turning all life's leisure into work, and real by turning all our being into doing, Merton stresses we will only succeed in producing a hell on earth. Navigating paradoxes, or polarities you might say, is a path of uncertainty and openness. Buddhist teachings call this path the middle way. The longtime meditation teacher Jack Kornfield explains that Buddhist psychology shows us the paradox of the universe, within and beyond the opposites. In his book, Wise Heart, Kornfield explains, quote, "The middle way describes the middle ground between attachment and aversion, between being and non-being, form and emptiness, free will and determinism. The more we delve into the middle way, the more deeply we come to rest between the play of opposites." End quote. Paradoxes are an inevitable ingredient in the art of living. These apparent opposites are inextricably linked. There is no light without dark. The late Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh described in No Mud, No Lotus the play between happiness and suffering. He says we all want to be happy, and many books and teachers in the world try to help people become happier. Yet we all continue to suffer. Therefore, we may think that we're doing it wrong. Somehow, we are failing at happiness. But paradoxically, enjoying happiness doesn't require zero suffering. In fact, Han explains the art of happiness is also the art of suffering well. We might consider welcoming our suffering instead of resisting, as Han suggests. Making space for paradox is to make space for life. It is an invitation to acknowledge, embrace, and be open to the mystery and meaning of life. Farewell. In our reflection today, I want to talk about perspectives in general and see if we can discuss how we might put these ideas into practice in daily life. You can think of figures like the pre-Socratic philosopher Heraclitus, who I mentioned initially, stressing the need to hold several perspectives or points of view. Heraclitus would say things like, "Humans value gold, but donkeys do not. The ocean water is polluted for humans, but purified for fish. The way up the mountain is also the way down." He's referring to the idea depending on where we stand, whether we're at the base or the peak of the mountain. The notion of paradox connects with working with our perspectives or attempting to see clearly. You might call it cognitive flexibility in psychology. There's an example that comes from meditations of the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius. He wrote this to himself, quote, "How useful it is when you're served roast meat and similar dishes to think to yourself, this is the corpse of a fish. This is the corpse of a bird or a pig." Or again, to see wine as mere grape juice. How good these thoughts are at reaching and getting to the heart of things. They enable you to see things for what they are. This should be a lifelong exercise. End quote. Many philosophical and spiritual practices are designed to help us see from various perspectives. One such practice is the view from above. In this practice, we simultaneously hold two perspectives, the whole being a cosmic view from above, and the part, grounded in daily life. So let's revisit the reflection question I posed in the meditation. Consider taking a moment to reflect on a recent challenge. Once you have a situation in mind, you might ask yourself, how does this situation look from a cosmic view from above? Or you might ask, what are the potential upsides and downsides of the situation? Since life is uncertain, most situations are seldom all upside or downside. Making space for paradox is learning to be open to life and the many ways it may unfold. Wisdom traditions have many names for accepting and aligning ourselves to life. The Stoics advise us to live in accordance with nature. The Taoists say, live in the flow of life. And spiritual and philosophical traditions have phrases and practices like acceptance, surrender, and letting go. The Swiss psychologist Carl Jung once observed, psychological or spiritual development always requires a greater capacity for anxiety and ambiguity. Put another way, a greater capacity to live in the paradox or tensions of life. An example we discussed recently is anxiety and freedom. Anxiety is born from possibility. Our capacity for freedom brings with it anxiety. Anxiety is the state of the human being when we confront our inherent freedom, stress Soren Kierkegaard. You can read more about this idea in a letter titled Anxiety and the Good Life, which I'll put a link to in the show notes. But it's important to remember that life is uncertain, impermanent, and you might say chaotic. But life is also precious, mysterious, and you might say beautiful. Making space for paradox connects with what the writer Joseph Campbell called saying yes to life. In his classic A Hero with a Thousand Faces, he suggested participating joyfully in the world's sorrows. Although one cannot cure the world of sorrows, or complexities for that matter, one can choose to live in joy. The warrior's or hero's approach, according to Campbell, is to say yes to life, to say yes to the paradoxes and the many perspectives that life offers. Thank you for listening to another episode of the In Search of Wisdom podcast. I hope you found something useful for daily life. If so, I encourage you to put what you heard into practice. If you're interested in more tools for the art of living, consider subscribing to Perennial Meditations on Substack. By becoming a member, you'll help support the project and gain access to our podcasts, meditations, and courses. Until next time, be wise and be well.